Chen had been invisible in Portland's artisan community for 3 years, and that invisibility had kept her alive. Her tiny studio apartment in the Pearl District looked like any other struggling artist's space, cluttered with wire cutters, beading supplies, and half-finished necklaces that caught the light from rain-streaked windows. The Etsy shop that paid her rent, Luminous Creations, specialized in delicate silver jewelry that local college students bought for $23 apiece, never suspecting that the woman who made them could engineer devices capable of leveling city blocks. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The morning fog rolled through Portland's industrial district like a gray curtain, muffling the sounds of early commuters and delivery trucks. Chen stood at her kitchen window, watching the city wake up while her fingers automatically twisted silver wire into intricate patterns. At 28, she had perfected the art of being unremarkable, her straight black hair always pulled into a practical ponytail, her clothes chosen for their ability to blend into any crowd. The neighbors in her building knew her as the quiet jewelry maker in apartment 4B, who kept strange hours and received unusual packages. What they didn't know was that those packages contained materials that would make federal agents very interested in her morning routine. The innocent-looking jewelry supplies that cluttered her workspace included titanium filaments, micro-circuitry components, and chemical compounds that existed in a legal gray area when purchased separately but became highly regulated when combined. With the knowledge possessed, she had learned to source everything through legitimate channels, spreading her purchases across dozens of suppliers to avoid patterns that might trigger automated monitoring systems. Maya's day began the same way it had for 3 years running. She brewed coffee in a French press that cost more than most people's monthly grocery budget, a small indulgence that reminded her of a life when money had been no object and her talents had been appreciated by people who understood their true value. She opened her laptop and checked her Etsy messages, responding to customers who wanted custom pieces or had questions about shipping times. The correspondence was mundane, filled with discussions about chain lengths and gemstone preferences. But Maya approached each interaction with meticulous care. Mrs. Henderson from Eugene wanted a pendant for her granddaughter's graduation. Tyler, a freshman at Portland State, needed matching earrings for his girlfriend's birthday. Sarah Chen, no relation despite the shared surname, was looking for a statement necklace for a job interview. Maya responded to each message with the warm professionalism she'd cultivated, offering design suggestions and estimated completion times. None of her customers suspected that their jewelry maker was analyzing each request for potential security risks, cross-referencing names against databases she accessed through channels that officially didn't exist. The studio space Maya rented in the Hawthorne district had once housed a small electronics repair shop, and the previous tenant's modifications suited her needs perfectly. The reinforced workbench could handle equipment that produced significant vibrations, and the upgraded electrical system supported tools that drew more power than typical jewelry making required. Maya had added her own improvements over the years, including a ventilation system that could clear chemical fumes and a storage system that kept sensitive materials at precise temperatures. Her legitimate jewelry making was actually quite good, a skill she'd developed during the long months of establishing her cover identity. Maya found the work meditative, the repetitive motions of shaping metal and setting stones, providing a counterpoint to the mental intensity of her other projects. The pieces she created for her Etsy shop were genuinely beautiful, incorporating techniques she'd learned from YouTube tutorials and community college courses. The irony wasn't lost on her that some of the best work she'd ever done was the least important. The storage room behind her main workspace told a different story entirely. Behind a false wall that appeared to be nothing more than exposed brick was a climate-controlled chamber, containing materials and equipment that would be impossible to explain to casual observers. Precision scales that could measure to the microgram. Sat next to microscopes capable of examining molecular structures. Sealed containers held compounds that were perfectly legal in small quantities but became weapons grade when concentrated and combined according to formulas Maya carried in her memory rather than writing them down. Maya's real expertise lay in creating devices that appeared to be something entirely different from their true purpose. The delicate silver bracelet she wore on her left wrist looked like any other piece of handmade jewelry, but embedded within. Its links were pressure sensors, a GPS transmitter, and a small explosive charge that could destroy the device if it fell into the wrong hands. The pendant she never removed contained a communication system that could reach encrypted networks on frequencies most people didn't know existed. The transformation from her real identity to Maya Chen had taken 18 months of careful planning and execution. She'd studied the Portland artisan community with the same attention to detail she'd once applied to military targets, learning the language of independent artists and understanding the cultural nuances that separated authentic creators from obvious infiltrators. She'd attended craft fairs and gallery openings, built relationships with suppliers and customers, created a digital footprint that would satisfy casual investigation. The hardest part hadn't been learning new skills or creating false documentation. The hardest part had been accepting that Dr. Elena Vasquez, the woman who'd held 3 advanced degrees and possessed security clearances that most generals never achieved, would never exist again. Elena had died in a laboratory explosion that had been classified as an industrial accident, though the real circumstances were known only to a handful of people who'd made it clear that asking questions would be hazardous to one's health. Maya's morning routine included a security protocol that would have seemed paranoid to most people, but was simply prudent given her circumstances. She checked for signs of surveillance using a combination of electronic sweeps and visual observation techniques, looking for patterns in vehicle placement or pedestrian behavior that might indicate professional interest in her activities. The coffee shop across the street provided an excellent vantage point for watching her building, and Maya had memorized the faces of its regular customers well enough to notice when someone new spent too much time looking in her direction. Legitimate side of her business was actually profitable, which had surprised Maya when she'd first started tracking her income and expenses. Her jewelry appealed to Portland's environmentally conscious consumers, who appreciated handmade goods and were willing to pay premium prices for unique designs. Maya had developed a reputation for reliability and quality that generated steady repeat business and word-of-mouth referrals. The success felt genuine in a way that made her wonder what her life might have been if she'd never developed other talents. But those other talents were never far from her mind, especially when she worked with materials that served dual purposes. The tiny LED lights she incorporated into some of her pieces were modified versions of components used in precision guidance systems. The miniature batteries that powered them could be reconfigured into initiators for devices that would make international headlines. Maya had learned to think of her jewelry work as ongoing research and development, maintaining skills that might be necessary if her carefully constructed peaceful existence ever came to an end. The Portland weather was perfect for someone who needed to blend into the background. The city's residents dressed in layers that could conceal equipment, and the frequent rain provided cover for movements that might otherwise attract attention. Maya had chosen her location carefully, considering factors like proximity to transportation networks, availability of materials, and the kind of community that would accept a private artist without asking too many questions. Portland's culture of minding one's own business had proven invaluable during her transition to civilian life. Maya's customers communicated with her primarily through Etsy's messaging system, but she maintained several other channels for different types of contact. The encrypted email account she checked twice daily had remained silent for 8 months, which was either a sign that her former associates had forgotten about her or were planning something that required careful preparation. The secure phone she kept in a hidden compartment had rung exactly once since she'd established her Portland identity, a wrong number that had still triggered a full security review of her operational protocols. The workshop's afternoon light was perfect for the detailed work Maya was completing on a commission piece, a silver necklace with embedded sapphires that would retail for $250. The customer, a tech executive from Beaverton, had requested specific modifications to the design that would make the piece unique. Maya worked with practiced precision, using tools that cost more than most people's rent, to achieve effects that appeared simple but required considerable skill to execute properly. As she worked, Maya's mind wandered to the parallel project she'd been developing in her secure workspace. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The client who'd commissioned the sapphire necklace had unknowingly provided inspiration for a device that could serve very different purposes. The same techniques Maya used to embed gems in precious metal could be applied to concealing electronic components in ways that would pass casual inspection. The aesthetic choices that made her jewelry appealing to customers also made her other devices essentially invisible to anyone who wasn't specifically looking for them. The late afternoon brought Maya's weekly trip to Powell's Books, an excursion that served multiple purposes beyond her genuine love of reading. The massive bookstore provided excellent cover for surveillance detection, with its multiple floors and complex layout, offering numerous opportunities to identify anyone following her movements. Maya had developed routes through the store that would reveal professional surveillance while appearing to be nothing more than browsing behavior. She purchased books regularly, building a collection that supported her cover identity as an artist interested in history and design. Today's selection included a technical manual on metallurgy disguised as a coffee table book about ancient jewelry techniques, and a novel about industrial espionage that contained information that might prove useful if her situation changed. Maya paid in cash, as she did for all purchases that weren't directly related to her Etsy business, maintaining financial patterns that would be difficult to analyze if anyone ever gained access to her records. The evening routine that concluded Maya's days was as carefully structured as her morning protocols. She prepared dinner using ingredients from the farmer's market, maintaining the health-conscious lifestyle that fit her cover identity, while ensuring that her physical conditioning remained at levels that might prove necessary if her past ever caught up with her. The yoga mat in her living room had seen regular use, not just for flexibility and strength, but for maintaining the kind of body awareness that could mean the difference between life and death in certain circumstances. Maya's apartment contained enough genuine artistic materials and completed jewelry pieces to satisfy any casual inspection, but the real workshop was in the basement storage unit she rented under a different name. The space was accessed through Portland's underground tunnel system, a network of passages that had been used for various purposes throughout the city's history and now provided routes that didn't appear on any modern maps. Maya had spent months learning the tunnel system's layout, identifying access points and escape routes that would be invaluable if she ever needed to disappear quickly. The basement workshop contained equipment that would be impossible to explain, as jewelry-making supplies. Precision lathes capable of machining components to tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch sat next to chemical analysis equipment that could identify molecular structures. Maya had assembled the facility gradually over 2 years, purchasing items through multiple identities and ensuring that no single transaction would trigger automated monitoring systems. The result was a laboratory that could produce devices limited only by her imagination and the laws of physics. The most sophisticated project currently in development was a series of pendants that appeared to be nothing more than decorative silver discs but contained enough explosive material to breach reinforced concrete. The challenge hadn't been creating the devices themselves, but ensuring they could pass inspection by anyone who might examine them closely. Maya had solved the problem by incorporating the explosive components into the silver matrix itself, creating alloys that were chemically stable under normal conditions, but could be triggered by specific electromagnetic frequencies. Maya's cover identity as a struggling artist was supported by financial records that would satisfy investigation by anyone who didn't have access to the most sophisticated forensic accounting tools. She paid taxes on her Etsy income, maintained bank accounts that showed appropriate transaction patterns, and even carried student loan debt that provided explanation for her modest lifestyle. The monthly payments on those loans were actually transfers to accounts she controlled, but the paper trail would appear legitimate to casual examination. The Portland art scene provided Maya with a social circle that was both genuine and useful for maintaining her cover. She attended gallery openings and craft fairs, participated in online forums about metalworking techniques, and had developed friendships with other artists who knew her only as the quiet jewelry maker who produced beautiful work and kept her personal life private. These relationships required careful management, providing enough social connection to appear normal, while avoiding the kind of intimate knowledge that could compromise her security. Maya's sleep patterns were regulated by training that had once been necessary for survival in hostile environments. She woke naturally at 4:30 each morning, alert and ready for action within seconds of consciousness. The habit had proven useful during her transition to civilian life, providing hours of productive work before the city fully awakened and reducing the likelihood of encounters that might reveal details about her real activities. The dreams that sometimes interrupted her rest were reminders of the life she'd left behind, filled with images of laboratories and colleagues who'd shared her dedication to pushing the boundaries of what was scientifically possible. Maya had learned to distinguish between normal stress dreams and the specific nightmares that might indicate her subconscious had detected threats her conscious mind had missed. The difference could be crucial if her carefully maintained anonymity ever began to crack. Maya's morning coffee ritual had evolved into a form of meditation, providing time to review her security protocols and plan the day's activities. She monitored news sources for developments that might affect her situation, tracked shipping schedules for materials she'd ordered, and reviewed her Etsy messages for anything that might indicate more than casual interest in her work. The process had become automatic, requiring no conscious effort while providing the constant vigilance that had kept her alive and free for 3 years. The rain that began falling as Maya prepared for another day of jewelry making was typical for Portland in November, creating the kind of gray atmosphere that matched her carefully cultivated image as a slightly melancholy artist focused on her craft. She dressed in layers that could conceal equipment if necessary, while appearing appropriate for someone who spent her days working with metal and chemicals. The outfit was completed with the silver bracelet that never left her wrist and the pendant that contained enough technology to coordinate with satellite networks. Maya's reflection in the rain-streaked window showed a woman who had successfully erased her past and built a new life based on skills she'd never expected to develop. The face looking back at her belonged to Maya Chen, independent artist and small business owner, not to Dr. Alana Vasquez, whose death certificate was filed in a government database that officially didn't exist. The transformation was complete, except for the memories and capabilities that no amount of careful acting could fully suppress. As she prepared to begin another day of creating beautiful objects that hid dangerous secrets, Maya wondered how much longer she could maintain the delicate balance between her public identity and her hidden nature. The jewelry business provided perfect cover for activities that would otherwise be impossible to explain, but it also created a routine that could be studied and exploited by anyone who suspected her true capabilities. 3 years of careful living had created a life worth protecting, but Maya knew that protection might eventually require revealing exactly why she was so dangerous to leave alone. The morning light filtering through Portland's perpetual cloud. Cover illuminated. A workshop where art and science intersected in ways that would fascinate academics and terrify security officials. Maya Chen began her day as she always did, creating beauty that concealed power and maintaining an ordinary life that was anything but normal. The city around her continued its routine activities, unaware that one of its most dangerous residents was hidden in plain sight among the artists and dreamers who gave Portland its character. Maya's story was far from over, though she'd spent 3 years hoping it might be. The past had a way of finding people who possessed certain kinds of knowledge, and the skills that had once made her invaluable to powerful organizations wouldn't remain secret forever. But for now, she was simply Maya Chen, jewelry maker and Portland resident, creating beautiful things for people who appreciated handmade craftsmanship and had no idea they were dealing with someone who could change the world with the contents of her workshop. The delicate balance between art and danger that defined Maya's existence was about to be tested in ways she'd spent years preparing for but hoping to avoid. Because some secrets were too valuable to stay buried, and some talents were too dangerous to remain unused, no matter how carefully their possessor tried to disappear into the comfortable anonymity of artistic creation. The disruption to Maya's carefully orchestrated life arrived on a Tuesday morning disguised as a routine Etsy order. The message appeared normal at first glance, a request for a custom silver bracelet with specific gemstone requirements. But the details contained subtle markers that made Maya's blood turn cold. The customer's username, Crystal Clear 47, referenced a project designation she'd hoped never to see again, and the requested delivery address was located 3 blocks from a facility that shouldn't exist according to any public records. Maya stared at her laptop screen for several minutes, analyzing every word of the message for additional coded information. The bracelet specifications described materials and dimensions that corresponded to components she'd designed 5 years earlier, before her life had exploded into fragments and she'd been forced to rebuild herself as someone completely different. The request was either an impossible coincidence or a signal that people she'd assumed were dead had found her hiding place among Portland's artisan community. The customer had included a photograph as reference for the design they wanted, showing a woman wearing jewelry that appeared unremarkable to anyone without specialized knowledge. But Maya recognized the subtle modifications that transformed ordinary accessories into sophisticated surveillance equipment, and she knew the face in the photograph belonged to someone who'd been reported killed in the same laboratory incident that had supposedly claimed her own life. Dr. Sarah Kim was alive, operating under deep cover, and reaching out through channels that indicated she needed help from someone with very specific capabilities. Maya's hands remained steady as she typed a response acknowledging the order and requesting additional details about the customer's preferences, but her mind was racing through implications and possibilities. Sarah Kim had been the most brilliant materials engineer on their research team, capable of creating substances that existed at the cutting edge of theoretical chemistry. If she was still alive and seeking contact, it meant their former project had survived in some form and was possibly continuing without the oversight that had originally governed their work. The photograph Sarah had included contained additional information encoded in ways that would be invisible to casual observers, but clear to anyone who understood their old communication protocols. The angles of the jewelry pieces spelled out coordinates in a system they'd developed for secure dead drops, and the lighting patterns indicated urgency levels that suggested Sarah was operating under significant time pressure. Whatever had brought her out of hiding was serious enough to risk exposing them both to organizations that had demonstrated their willingness to eliminate inconvenient scientists. Maya closed her laptop and began the security protocols she'd hoped never to implement. The workshop needed to be sanitized of anything that might provide evidence of her real capabilities, and her escape routes required activation after 3 years of dormancy. She moved through her apartment with practiced efficiency, identifying items that needed to be preserved and materials that required destruction. The transformation from Maya Chen, jewelry maker, to Elena Vasquez, weapons researcher, was happening, whether she wanted it or not. The first priority was securing the basement laboratory where her most sensitive projects were stored. Maya accessed the facility through maintenance tunnels that connected to Portland's underground infrastructure, following routes she'd memorized but rarely used. The laboratory had been designed for rapid evacuation, with critical materials stored in containers that could be moved quickly and equipment configured for remote destruction if necessary. Maya began the process of transferring the most important items to secondary locations while preparing to abandon everything else. The coordinates Sarah had encoded led to a location in Forest Park, Portland's massive urban wilderness that provided excellent cover for clandestine meetings. Maya knew the area well, having used it for training exercises that maintained skills her cover identity couldn't explain. The specified meeting point was isolated enough to avoid accidental encounters, while offering multiple escape routes if the situation proved to be a trap. Maya prepared for the possibility that Sarah's contact attempt was being monitored by hostile forces. Maya's approach to the meeting location involved techniques she hadn't used since establishing her Portland identity. She varied her route through the city using public transportation and pedestrian paths that would make surveillance difficult, changing clothes twice and employing counter-surveillance measures that transformed her appearance and movement patterns. The woman who entered Forest Park looked nothing like the jewelry maker who'd left the Pearl District apartment that morning. Sarah Kim was waiting at the designated coordinates, but the years had changed her in ways that went beyond simple aging. She carried herself with the hyper-vigilant posture of someone who'd learned to expect threats from any direction, and her eyes held the kind of exhaustion that came from maintaining false identities under extreme pressure. The reunion between two women who'd supposedly died in the same explosion was conducted in whispers beneath the canopy of old-growth trees. The story Sarah told during their brief conversation painted a picture of betrayal and conspiracy that explained why they'd both been forced to disappear. Their research team had been developing materials for what they'd been told were defensive applications, creating compounds that could neutralize chemical weapons and protect civilian populations. The reality had been far different, with their work being weaponized by organizations that operated outside government oversight and sold advanced capabilities to the highest bidders. The laboratory explosion that had supposedly killed half the research team had been orchestrated to eliminate witnesses to illegal weapons development, but Sarah had received advance warning from a contact within the intelligence community. She'd managed to escape with samples of their most dangerous research, material that could cause unprecedented devastation if it fell into the wrong hands. For 3 years, she'd been hiding while gathering evidence about the conspiracy that had destroyed their team and perverted their scientific work. Maya learned that their former colleagues hadn't all died in the laboratory incident. Dr. Marcus Webb, their project director, had survived and continued their research under different auspices, developing weapons that were being field-tested in conflicts around the world. The compounds Maya and Sarah had designed to protect people were being used to create increasingly sophisticated instruments of destruction, and Webb was preparing to sell the most advanced formulations to terrorist organizations that could destabilize entire regions. The reason for Sarah's emergence from hiding was an intelligence report indicating that Webb's organization was planning to eliminate all remaining witnesses to the original research project. Maya's jewelry business had been discovered despite her careful operational security, and her location was known to people who would soon be taking action to ensure their secrets remained buried. Sarah had risked exposure to warn Maya and propose a collaboration that could expose Webb's conspiracy while protecting them both from elimination. The evidence Sarah had compiled over 3 years of careful investigation included financial records, showing how research funding had been diverted to unauthorized projects, communication intercepts proving coordination with criminal organizations, and technical documentation demonstrating that their original defensive research had been perverted into offensive weapons. The material was sufficient to trigger congressional investigations and criminal prosecutions, but it needed to be delivered to people who could act on it without being compromised by the same networks that had corrupted their original project. Maya's response to Sarah's proposal was influenced by 3 years of building a life she genuinely valued, relationships with people who knew her as an artist rather than a weapons researcher. The decision to help expose Webb's conspiracy would almost certainly mean abandoning the identity she'd worked so hard to establish, but the alternative was allowing their scientific work to be used for purposes they'd never intended. The moral calculations were complex, but the practical considerations were becoming clearer as their meeting progressed. Sarah had identified a journalist with the credentials and protection necessary to investigate their claims, without being silenced by the organizations involved. Amanda Foster worked for a publication that specialized in exposing government corruption, and she had sources within intelligence agencies that could verify the evidence Sarah had compiled. The challenge would be making contact with Foster without alerting Webb's people to their activities, a task that would require careful coordination and flawless execution. The plan Sarah outlined involved using Maya's legitimate jewelry business as cover for activities that would gather additional evidence while preparing to transfer everything to Foster's protection. Maya's workshop contained equipment that could analyze the samples Sarah had preserved, confirming their chemical composition and documenting their potential applications. The technical analysis would provide the scientific foundation needed to support Sarah's intelligence about Webb's weapons development program. Maya agreed to the collaboration with reservations that reflected her understanding of the risks involved. Her Portland life represented the first peace she'd known since leaving graduate school, and destroying it to pursue justice felt like sacrificing something precious for principles that might not survive contact with reality. But the alternative was allowing Webb to continue profiting from their work while eliminating anyone who might expose his crimes, a scenario that would end with both of them dead and their research being used to cause immense suffering. The meeting concluded with an exchange of contact protocols and a schedule for future communications that would allow them to coordinate without creating patterns that might be detected by surveillance systems. Sarah disappeared into the forest using routes that would take her back to whatever identity she'd established, while Maya returned to the city through different paths that concealed her destination. Both women understood that their brief conversation had changed everything, setting in motion events that would either expose a dangerous conspiracy or get them both killed. Maya's return to her apartment required careful attention to surveillance detection, looking for signs that her meeting with Sarah had been observed, or that her building was being watched by people with hostile intentions. The neighborhood appeared normal, but Maya had learned not to trust appearances when dealing with organizations that possessed sophisticated capabilities. She entered her building through a service entrance that wasn't visible from the street, taking routes through the structure that would avoid security cameras. The evening brought Maya's first real look at the samples Sarah had preserved from their original research. The materials appeared innocuous, small vials containing powders and liquids that could pass for artist supplies. But Maya recognized formulations that represented years of advanced chemical engineering. The compounds were stable under normal storage conditions, but could be triggered to release energy in ways that defied conventional understanding of explosive materials. Sarah had literally been carrying enough destructive potential to level city blocks. Analysis of the samples confirmed Maya's worst fears about how their research had been weaponized. The defensive compounds they'd designed to neutralize chemical weapons had been modified into delivery systems for biological agents, creating weapons that could contaminate large areas while appearing to be industrial accidents. The protective materials they developed for first responders had been perverted into substances that could defeat any known detection system, making their weapons essentially invisible until deployment. Maya's workshop became a crime scene laboratory as she documented the evidence Sarah had provided, photographing molecular structures and recording chemical compositions that proved their original research had been stolen and corrupted. The work required equipment that would be impossible to explain as jewelry-making supplies, forcing Maya to acknowledge that her cover identity was becoming untenable. The technical analysis would provide crucial evidence for exposing Webb's conspiracy, but it also created material that could only have been produced by someone with access to classified research. The contact protocols Sarah had established included emergency procedures for situations where their investigation might be compromised, contingencies that reflected her understanding of the organizations they were challenging. Maya studied the escape plans and communication codes, recognizing techniques that had been developed for operations in hostile environments. Sarah's 3 years of hiding had clearly included training that went far beyond what their original scientific education had provided. Maya's sleep that night was interrupted by dreams that mixed memories of her legitimate research with nightmares about its weaponized applications, images of laboratory equipment transforming into instruments of destruction. She woke several times to check her security systems, looking for indications that her building was being approached by people who might have traced her connection to Sarah. The hypervigilance was exhausting, but it was also necessary preparation for challenges that were almost certainly coming. The morning brought confirmation that their investigation was proceeding on schedule, with Sarah's encrypted messages reporting successful contact with Amanda Foster and preliminary interest in their evidence. The journalist had agreed to meet with Sarah under carefully controlled conditions, bringing her own security measures to ensure the encounter wouldn't be compromised by surveillance. Foster's reputation for protecting sources and exposing government corruption made her the ideal person to handle material as sensitive as what they were providing. Maya's legitimate jewelry work continued as scheduled, providing cover for activities that were becoming increasingly difficult to conceal. She completed orders for customers who had no idea their jewelry maker was simultaneously analyzing chemical weapons and documenting evidence of international conspiracies. The contrast between her public activities and her hidden work was becoming surreal, but maintaining normal routines was essential for avoiding attention from people who might be watching for changes in her behavior. The technical analysis Maya was conducting revealed additional evidence of Webb's weapons development program, including compounds that hadn't been part of their original research, but showed clear derivation from their work. Webb's organization had continued advancing their research, developing capabilities that went far beyond what their team had originally envisioned. The implications were terrifying, suggesting that their defensive research had spawned an entire generation of weapons that could reshape modern warfare. Sarah's next message contained intelligence about Webb's current location and activities, information that had been gathered through sources within the intelligence community who were concerned about unauthorized weapons development. Webb was operating from a facility in Nevada that didn't appear on any public records, conducting research that was funded through channels that bypassed normal oversight procedures. The facility was heavily guarded and equipped with security measures that would make direct action extremely dangerous. Maya's analysis of Webb's research revealed patterns that suggested he was preparing for a major operation that would demonstrate his weapons capabilities to potential buyers. The chemical signatures Sarah had identified indicated preparation of delivery systems that could contaminate large areas with biological agents, creating terrorism scenarios that would generate massive demand for the defensive technologies Webb was also developing. The plan was diabolical in its sophistication, creating problems that only Webb's organization could solve while generating enormous profits from global instability. The evidence package Maya and Sarah were preparing for Amanda Foster included technical documentation that would be comprehensible to experts while remaining accessible to general audiences, scientific proof that would support their claims about Webb's weapons development program. Maya's role was providing the chemical analysis that proved their samples were derived from their original research, documentation that would be impossible to dispute or discredit. The work required skills that only a handful of people possessed, making Maya's testimony crucial for exposing the conspiracy. Foster's response to their preliminary evidence was enthusiastic but cautious, reflecting her understanding that investigating organizations with intelligence capabilities required extraordinary security measures. She agreed to meet with both Sarah and Maya simultaneously, bringing her own technical experts to verify their claims and assess the evidence they'd compiled. The meeting would take place in a location that provided security for all parties while allowing the detailed discussion necessary for Foster to understand the full scope of their allegations. Maya's preparation for the meeting with Foster involved creating documentation that would survive scrutiny by experts who might be skeptical of their claims, technical evidence that demonstrated their qualifications and validated their analysis of Webb's weapons program. The work required access to equipment that was definitely not available to typical jewelry makers, forcing Maya to acknowledge that her cover identity was becoming completely unsustainable. The choice was between maintaining her false identity and exposing crimes that could destabilize global security. The days leading up to the Foster meeting were marked by increasing signs that Maya's activities were being monitored by people with sophisticated surveillance capabilities. Vehicles that appeared too frequently in her neighborhood, pedestrians who lingered too long near her building, and electronic interference that suggested her communications were being intercepted. Maya implemented countermeasures that reflected training she'd hoped never to use, techniques for evading surveillance that transformed her daily routines into complex operational procedures. Sarah's final message before the Foster meeting contained intelligence that changed everything about their situation, information that suggested Webb's organization was preparing to eliminate them before their evidence could be made public. The timeline for their investigation had compressed dramatically, with hostile forces moving to silence them within days rather than weeks. The meeting with Foster would either expose Webb's conspiracy or provide the last opportunity for Sarah and Maya to disappear before being permanently silenced. Maya's last night as a jewelry maker was spent preparing for possibilities that ranged from vindication to violent death, contingencies that reflected the reality of challenging organizations that operated outside legal constraints. She transferred critical evidence to locations that would survive if her workshop was destroyed, established communication protocols that would allow her to coordinate with Sarah under emergency conditions, and prepared escape routes that would take her beyond the reach of people who wanted her dead. The peaceful life she'd built in Portland was ending whether she survived the coming confrontation or not. The meeting with Amanda Foster would determine whether 3 years of hiding had been preparation for justice or merely a delay before inevitable elimination. Whether the research Maya and Sarah had originally conducted to protect people could be reclaimed from those who'd perverted it into instruments of destruction. The jewelry maker who'd spent 3 years creating beautiful objects was about to become Elena Vasquez again, weapons researcher and potential target, in a confrontation that would either expose the truth or silence it forever. The meeting with Amanda Foster took place in a converted warehouse in southeast Portland that served as a community space for local artists, providing the kind of open environment where surveillance would be difficult to conceal and conversations could be conducted without electronic interference. Maya arrived first, using routes through the city that would reveal anyone following her movements while appearing to be nothing more than an artist visiting colleagues. The space was filled with works in progress, sculptures, and installations that provided excellent cover for the kind of technical discussion they needed to have. Foster appeared precisely on schedule, accompanied by a man she introduced as Dr. James Richardson, a former government scientist who specialized in analyzing claims about classified research programs. Richardson's credentials were impressive, including previous exposure of weapons development programs that had operated outside legal oversight, and his presence suggested that Foster took their allegations seriously enough to involve experts who could verify technical claims. Maya recognized the careful preparation that had gone into arranging this meeting, the kind of operational security that indicated Foster understood the dangers involved in investigating organizations with intelligence capabilities. Sarah Kim materialized from the warehouse's maze of artistic installations, like a ghost returning to the world of the living, carrying a sealed case that contained 3 years of carefully preserved evidence about Webb's weapons development program. The reunion between the 3 women who were about to challenge powerful forces was conducted with professional efficiency, each understanding that their window of opportunity was measured in hours rather than days. Foster's recording equipment was state-of-the-art, designed to capture technical discussions that would need to survive legal challenges and expert scrutiny. The presentation Sarah and Maya delivered over the next 4 hours was a masterclass in scientific evidence and investigative documentation, combining chemical analysis with intelligence gathering to paint a comprehensive picture of how their defensive research had been perverted into weapons of unprecedented sophistication. Richardson's questions were penetrating and well-informed, testing their claims with the kind of technical knowledge that separated legitimate scientists from conspiracy theorists. Maya found herself explaining molecular structures and reaction mechanisms that she'd hoped never to discuss again, providing the kind of detailed technical testimony that only someone with her specific expertise could deliver. Foster's journalism background became evident as she guided the conversation toward evidence that would be compelling to general audiences while maintaining the scientific rigor that Richardson demanded. She understood that exposing Webb's conspiracy would require documentation that could survive attacks from organizations with unlimited resources and sophisticated disinformation capabilities. The story she was planning would need to be bulletproof, supported by evidence that experts could verify independently and sources that couldn't be discredited or eliminated. The breakthrough moment came when Richardson analyzed the samples Sarah had preserved, using portable equipment that confirmed Maya's chemical analysis while providing additional data about the weapon's potential applications. His expression changed as he realized the scope of what Webb's organization had developed, weapons that could cause catastrophic damage while appearing to be industrial accidents or natural disasters. The implications went far beyond simple terrorism, suggesting capabilities that could destabilize entire governments, while providing perfect deniability for the organizations responsible. Maya's technical presentation included documentation of the defensive applications their research had originally been intended to serve, demonstrating how compounds designed to protect first responders had been modified into delivery systems for biological agents. The contrast between their original intentions and Webb's weapons development was stark, providing the kind of moral narrative that would make their story compelling to audiences who might otherwise dismiss claims about government conspiracy. Foster recognized the power of the before and after comparison, the story of idealistic scientists whose work had been stolen and corrupted. Sarah's intelligence about Webb's current operations revealed a timeline that made immediate action essential, information indicating that he was preparing to field test his most advanced weapons in a scenario that would demonstrate their capabilities to potential buyers. The test would involve contaminating a major urban area with biological agents while making the attack appear to be an industrial accident, creating the kind of terrorism scenario that would generate massive demand for the defensive technologies Webb was also developing. The plan was scheduled for implementation within days, requiring emergency intervention to prevent a catastrophe that could kill thousands of people. Foster's response to the urgency of the situation was immediate and professional, activating networks of sources and contacts that could verify Sarah's intelligence while preparing to publish evidence that would expose Webb's conspiracy before his weapons test could be conducted. She understood that traditional investigative timelines were impossible given the imminent threat, but she also recognized that premature publication without proper verification could discredit their claims and allow Webb to escape accountability. The balance between speed and accuracy required expertise that Foster had developed over years of investigating sensitive stories. Richardson's analysis of Webb's weapons revealed technical capabilities that exceeded anything in the current arsenal of known terrorist organizations, chemical compounds that could penetrate protective equipment while remaining undetectable until activation. The weapons represented a qualitative leap in destructive potential, combining the sophistication of state-sponsored research with the flexibility of private development programs that operated outside government oversight. The implications for global security were staggering, suggesting that Webb's organization had essentially privatized weapons of mass destruction. Maya's role in the developing crisis expanded beyond providing technical testimony to actively participating in efforts to prevent Webb's weapons test, using her expertise to develop countermeasures that could neutralize the biological agents he was planning to deploy. The work required access to laboratory facilities that weren't available through normal channels, forcing Foster to activate contacts within universities and research institutions who could provide the necessary equipment without asking awkward questions. Maya found herself returning to the kind of cutting-edge research she'd hoped to leave behind, but now in service of preventing rather than creating weapons. The countermeasures Maya developed were themselves dangerous, compounds that could neutralize Webb's biological agents but required careful handling to avoid accidental exposure. The work was conducted in a university laboratory during off hours, with security provided by people Foster trusted to protect sources who were risking their lives to expose government corruption. Maya's hands moved with practiced precision as she created substances that existed at the cutting edge of chemical engineering, materials that could save thousands of lives if deployed correctly or cause massive casualties if they fell into the wrong hands. Sarah's continued intelligence gathering revealed additional details about Webb's weapons test, including the specific location where the attack would be conducted and the delivery method that would be used to disperse biological agents. The target was a major transportation hub during peak usage periods, chosen to maximize casualties while providing optimal conditions for testing the weapon's effectiveness against urban populations. Webb's organization had spent months preparing the attack scenario, establishing cover stories and escape routes that would allow them to observe the results, while avoiding responsibility for the consequences. Foster's investigation had attracted the attention of organizations that preferred to operate in shadows, generating pressure from sources within government agencies who wanted the story suppressed rather than published. The threats were subtle, but unmistakable, suggesting that Foster's continued investigation could have negative consequences for her career and personal safety. Maya recognized the tactics from her own experience with organizations that eliminated inconvenient witnesses, understanding that their window of opportunity was closing as hostile forces mobilized to silence them. The solution to their dilemma came from an unexpected source, a contact within law enforcement who had been investigating Webb's organization through different channels and was prepared to coordinate action based on the evidence Foster had compiled. Agent Lisa Santos worked for a joint task force that specialized in weapons proliferation cases, and she had the authority to initiate emergency interventions when civilian populations were threatened by weapons of mass destruction. Santos brought resources that Sarah and Maya couldn't access alone, including tactical teams that could neutralize Webb's weapons test while protecting the scientists who'd exposed his conspiracy. Maya's final contribution to stopping Webb's weapons test involved creating a device that appeared to be an ordinary piece of jewelry but contained enough explosive material to destroy his biological weapons before they could be deployed. The pendant she designed looked like any other piece of handmade silver jewelry, incorporating gemstones that concealed sophisticated electronics and chemical components that could be triggered remotely. The device represented everything Maya had learned about hiding dangerous capabilities within innocent appearances, art that served as a weapon when circumstances required extreme measures. The coordination between Foster's journalism, Santos's law enforcement resources, and Maya's technical capabilities created a response that addressed multiple aspects of Webb's threat simultaneously. Foster's story would expose the conspiracy and prevent future weapons development. Santos's tactical teams would neutralize the immediate threat to civilian populations, and Maya's device would ensure that Webb's biological weapons couldn't be used even if other countermeasures failed. The operation required precise timing and flawless execution, with failure potentially resulting in thousands of casualties and the successful deployment of weapons that could reshape modern terrorism. Webb's weapons test was scheduled to begin during the morning rush hour at Portland International Airport, using the transportation hub's ventilation systems to disperse biological agents that would affect the maximum number of people while creating optimal conditions for studying the weapon's effectiveness. Sarah's intelligence indicated that Webb himself would be present to observe the test, providing an opportunity to capture the architect of the conspiracy along with neutralizing his weapons. The operation would either expose and stop a dangerous weapons program or fail catastrophically with consequences that could extend far beyond Portland. Maya's preparation for the airport operation involved transforming herself back into Elena Vasquez for what she hoped would be the final time, abandoning the peaceful identity she'd built in favor of capabilities that might be necessary for stopping Webb's weapons test. She equipped herself with devices that appeared to be jewelry but contained communication systems, defensive measures, and emergency protocols that could coordinate with Santos's tactical teams. The transformation was both physical and psychological, requiring Maya to access skills and mindsets she'd spent 3 years trying to forget. The airport operation began before dawn, with Santos's teams positioning themselves to intercept Webb's weapons, while Maya and Sarah provided technical support. That would ensure the biological agents were neutralized before they could be deployed. Foster documented the operation from a safe distance, recording evidence that would support her story while staying clear of tactical actions that could compromise the mission. The coordination between journalism, law enforcement, and scientific expertise represented an unusual collaboration that reflected the unique nature of the threat they were addressing. Webb's weapons were concealed within airport maintenance equipment that would provide access to ventilation systems without triggering security protocols, demonstrating the sophisticated planning that had gone into developing the attack scenario. Maya's analysis of the delivery method revealed elegant engineering that combined simplicity with effectiveness, systems that could disperse biological agents throughout the airport's terminal buildings while appearing to be routine maintenance activities. The weapons represented years of research and development, investment that Webb was preparing to recoup through sales to terrorist organizations worldwide. The confrontation with Webb himself occurred in the airport's restricted maintenance areas, where Santos's teams encountered resistance from security personnel who were protecting the weapons test rather than airport operations. Maya found herself face to face with her former research director for the first time since the laboratory explosion that had supposedly killed her, seeing a man who'd perverted their scientific idealism into profitable conspiracy. Webb's expression when he recognized her was a mixture of surprise and calculation, the look of someone evaluating threats and opportunities with the cold precision of a professional criminal. The conversation between Maya and Webb revealed the full scope of his betrayal, including details about how he'd orchestrated the laboratory explosion to eliminate witnesses while preserving the research that had become the foundation for his weapons development program. Webb explained his actions with the casual confidence of someone who believed his superior planning would ultimately prevail, describing how their defensive research had been transformed into offensive capabilities that represented the future of asymmetric warfare. His words confirmed everything Sarah had suspected about the conspiracy that had destroyed their research team and perverted their scientific work. Maya's response to Webb's explanations was delivered through the explosive device she'd concealed within her pendant, a chemical reaction that destroyed his biological weapons while creating enough chaos to allow Santos's teams to capture Webb and his associates without further resistance. The explosion was precisely controlled, eliminating the biological agents without causing structural damage or civilian casualties, demonstrating the same precision that had characterized Maya's legitimate jewelry work. Webb's weapons program ended in flames that consumed years of research while leaving their creator alive to face prosecution for his crimes. Santos's tactical teams secured evidence that would support prosecutions for conspiracy, weapons trafficking, and terrorism. Documentation that revealed the full scope of Webb's network and its connections to organizations worldwide. The investigation that followed would expose similar weapons development programs in multiple countries, generating international cooperation that would make it difficult for future conspiracies to operate with the same impunity. Webb's capture represented a significant victory against the privatization of weapons of mass destruction, though Maya understood that other organizations would eventually attempt similar programs. Foster's story about the airport operation and Webb's weapons conspiracy was published simultaneously in multiple countries, generating international coverage that made suppression impossible even for organizations with sophisticated disinformation capabilities. The technical evidence Maya and Sarah had provided was verified by independent experts, establishing their credibility while exposing the full scope of how defensive research had been perverted into offensive weapons. The story became a landmark, explosive government corruption and private weapons development, generating reforms that would make similar conspiracies more difficult to organize and operate. Maya's testimony during Webb's prosecution provided crucial evidence about the technical aspects of his weapons program, expert analysis that helped juries understand the sophisticated engineering that had created such dangerous capabilities. Her appearance in court required careful security arrangements, protection from organizations that might want to eliminate witnesses to classified research programs, but it also represented a form of justice for the colleagues who died in the laboratory explosion Webb had orchestrated. The trial became a public examination of how scientific research could be corrupted and weaponized, generating awareness that would help prevent similar betrayals in the future. The aftermath of Webb's conviction left Maya with choices about her future that reflected the fundamental changes the conspiracy had created in her life, decisions about whether to return to legitimate scientific research or maintain the artistic identity that had provided 3 years of peace and purpose. The jewelry-making skills she'd developed weren't just cover anymore. They'd become a genuine source of satisfaction and creativity that represented possibilities for life beyond the classified research that had once defined her identity. Portland's artisan community welcomed her back without asking questions about her temporary absence, accepting her return with the kind of discretion that made the city attractive to people who valued privacy. Sarah Kim chose to return to legitimate scientific research, accepting a position with a university that specialized in defensive applications of chemical engineering, work that would continue their original mission of protecting people rather than creating weapons. Her experience with Webb's conspiracy had deepened her understanding of how research could be corrupted, knowledge that would inform future projects and help prevent similar betrayals. The collaboration between Sarah and Maya had restored their friendship while accomplishing justice for colleagues who died protecting their research from people who would weaponize it. Foster's career was enhanced by her expose of Webb's conspiracy, recognition that established her reputation as an investigative journalist willing to tackle stories that other reporters avoided because of their danger and complexity. She continued investigating similar cases, using the contacts and expertise she developed during the web investigation to expose other instances of government corruption and private weapons development. The network of sources she'd cultivated became a resource for future investigations that would continue protecting civilian populations from threats that operated outside public awareness. Maya's return to jewelry making was informed by 3 years of experience that had transformed her understanding of how art and science could intersect in ways that served human purposes rather than destructive ones. Her designs incorporated technical sophistication that reflected her scientific background while creating objects that were genuinely beautiful rather than concealing dangerous capabilities. The contrast with her previous work was stark, representing a conscious choice to use her skills for creation rather than destruction. Beauty rather than utility that could be perverted by people like Webb. The Portland artist community that welcomed Maya back had no idea that their quiet jewelry maker had helped prevent a terrorist attack that could have killed thousands of people. Exposure of a conspiracy that had reached the highest levels of government and private industry. Maya preferred the anonymity that allowed her to focus on creating objects that would bring joy rather than serve strategic purposes. Art that existed for its own sake rather than as cover for activities that could reshape modern warfare. The peaceful life she'd built was more precious because she'd nearly lost it to people who valued her capabilities more than her humanity. Maya's workshop returned to its original purpose as a place where metal was shaped into objects of beauty rather than instruments of destruction, where technical precision served aesthetic goals rather than weapons development. The equipment that had once analyzed chemical weapons was used to create alloys that enhanced the appearance of gemstones. Transformation that represented Maya's conscious choice to use her knowledge for purposes that aligned with her values, rather than serving organizations that would corrupt any research for their own ends. The story of Maya Chen's jewelry shop would never be told in full. The complete truth about handmade accessories that had concealed capabilities to prevent mass destruction remaining classified information that only a few people would ever know. Portland's residents continued buying beautiful jewelry from a maker who appreciated their support for local artisans, never suspecting that their purchases were helping someone build a new life after exposing conspiracy that had reached the highest levels of power. Maya's customers saw only the art, which was exactly how she wanted it to be. Webb's conviction and the exposure of his weapons development program generated reforms that would make similar conspiracies more difficult to organize and operate, though Maya understood that determined organizations would eventually find new ways to corrupt scientific research for destructive purposes. The vigilance required to prevent such betrayals was constant, demanding awareness from scientists who needed to understand how their work could be misused and courage from people willing to expose corruption when they discovered it. Maya's experience had taught her that protecting scientific idealism required active effort rather than passive assumption that research would be used ethically. The legacy of Maya's confrontation with Webb extended beyond preventing a single terrorist attack to include broader awareness of how defensive research could be weaponized by people who valued profit over human life, corruption that transformed tools for protection into instruments of mass destruction. The reforms generated by Foster's Expose would help prevent similar betrayals, but they also required ongoing vigilance from people who understood how easily noble purposes could be perverted by those who prioritized power over principles. Maya's peaceful existence as a Portland jewelry maker represented victory not just over Webb's conspiracy but over the assumption that people with dangerous knowledge were doomed to lives of violence and deception. That expertise in weapons development inevitably led to careers serving organizations that would use such knowledge for destructive purposes. Her choice to create beauty rather than weapons was a daily affirmation that technical skills could serve human values rather than being controlled by people who would corrupt any capability for their own ends. The quiet satisfaction Maya found in her artistic work was enhanced by the knowledge that she'd used her dangerous capabilities one final time to protect people rather than threaten them, that the expertise which had once made her valuable to weapons developers had ultimately served to expose and stop the kind of conspiracy that perverted scientific research for destructive purposes. The jewelry she created carried no hidden devices or concealed capabilities, existing solely to bring beauty into the world rather than serve purposes that their purchasers would never suspect. Maya Chen's story concluded not with dramatic revelations or spectacular confrontations, but with the quiet contentment of someone who'd chosen to use exceptional capabilities in service of ordinary human values, creating objects of beauty rather than instruments of destruction. Portland's artisan community continued supporting her work without knowing that their purchases were helping someone who'd helped prevent mass casualties, while exposing corruption that had reached the highest levels of power. The best endings, Maya had learned, were the ones that allowed people to disappear into peaceful lives that served purposes they could feel proud of rather than being controlled by organizations that would use any capability for their own destructive ends. The months following Webb's conviction brought unexpected visitors to Maya's workshop, people who arrived under various pretexts, but shared a common thread of knowing more about her background than casual customers should possess. Detective Rodriguez from the Portland Police Bureau stopped by ostensibly to commission a bracelet for his wife's anniversary, but his questions about metalworking techniques revealed familiarity with materials that weren't typically used in jewelry making. Professor Williams from Portland State University requested a consultation about incorporating scientific elements into an art installation, though her knowledge of chemical compounds suggested research interests that extended far beyond academic curiosity. Maya handled each encounter with the careful professionalism she'd perfected over years of maintaining her cover identity, providing answers that satisfied curiosity without revealing capabilities that could attract unwanted attention. The visitors were generally friendly, their interest appearing to stem from professional admiration rather than hostile investigation. But Maya recognized the pattern of people testing her knowledge and assessing her current activities. The network Foster had activated during the Webb investigation had apparently spread awareness of Maya's unique combination of scientific expertise and artistic skill. The most intriguing visitor arrived on a rainy Thursday afternoon when Maya was working on a commissioned piece for a local gallery owner, Dr. Jennifer Park introduced herself as a materials scientist researching applications for advanced metallurgy in protective equipment, but her credentials included positions with organizations that definitely weren't focused on civilian safety applications. Park's request was straightforward: consultation about creating jewelry that could serve dual purposes, accessories that would be beautiful while incorporating functional elements for people who needed discreet protection. Maya's initial response was cautious, recognizing that Park's proposal could easily become another path toward weapons development despite its apparently defensive focus. The conversation that followed revealed Park's genuine commitment to helping people who faced threats from domestic violence situations, law enforcement personnel who needed backup communication systems, and activists working in dangerous environments, who required protection that wouldn't attract attention from hostile forces. The applications Park described were genuinely defensive, creating tools that could save lives rather than threaten them. The collaboration Maya eventually agreed to with Dr. Park represented a careful balance between using her capabilities for beneficial purposes and avoiding the kind of research that could be weaponized by people with less ethical intentions. Maya's workshop became a laboratory for developing accessories that incorporated advanced materials in ways that appeared purely aesthetic, jewelry that could serve protective functions without revealing its true capabilities to casual observers. The work required all of Maya's expertise in chemistry and engineering, but it was applied to creating tools for protection rather than destruction. Park's research team included people whose background suggested experience with classified programs. But their current focus was clearly oriented toward defensive applications that served civilian populations rather than military objectives. Maya found herself working with engineers who understood the challenges of concealing advanced technology within everyday objects, materials scientists who could create substances that served multiple purposes, and designers who ensured that functional requirements didn't compromise aesthetic appeal. The team represented exactly the kind of collaboration Maya had hoped to find when she'd originally entered scientific research. The projects Maya developed with Park's team included communication devices disguised as earrings that could reach emergency services from locations where cellular coverage was unavailable, bracelets that contained medical sensors capable of detecting chemical exposure or biological contamination, and pendants that incorporated GPS transmitters for people who needed to be located quickly in emergency situations. Each device required sophisticated engineering to function reliably while appearing to be nothing more than attractive jewelry, challenges that drew on everything Maya had learned about hiding capabilities within innocent appearances. Maya's reputation within Park's network led to requests for consultation on increasingly complex projects, applications that pushed the boundaries of what could be achieved within the constraints of jewelry design. She worked on developing materials that could neutralize chemical threats while appearing to be decorative elements, communication systems that could operate in environments where traditional electronics would fail, and protection devices that could defend against biological weapons while looking like fashion accessories. The work was intellectually challenging in ways that reminded Maya why she'd originally been drawn to scientific research. The success of Maya's collaboration with Park's team generated interest from organizations that focused on humanitarian applications, groups working in conflict zones who needed protection that wouldn't identify them as valuable targets for hostile forces. Maya found herself consulted about creating devices for journalists working in dangerous areas, medical personnel operating in unstable regions, and relief workers who needed emergency communication capabilities in locations where traditional infrastructure had been destroyed. The applications were genuinely beneficial, using advanced technology to protect people rather than threaten them. Maya's workshop evolved to accommodate the increasingly sophisticated projects she was developing, incorporating equipment that could analyze materials at the molecular level while maintaining the appearance of an artist's studio. The legitimate jewelry making that had originally served as cover became integrated with defensive research in ways that created genuinely beautiful objects with hidden protective capabilities. Maya found satisfaction in work that combined aesthetic achievement with functional benefit, creating tools that could save lives while bringing beauty into the world. The financial success of Maya's defensive applications allowed her to expand beyond her original Portland workshop, establishing relationships with manufacturers who could produce her designs at scales that would benefit larger populations. The business model Park's team developed ensured that protective jewelry would be available to people who needed it, regardless of their ability to pay premium prices, subsidizing emergency applications through sales to customers who appreciated advanced craftsmanship. Maya's work began reaching people worldwide who faced threats that could be addressed through discrete protective technology. Dr. Park's research revealed that Maya's defensive applications were already making measurable differences in survival rates for people working in dangerous environments, statistical evidence that their collaboration was achieving its intended goals of protecting vulnerable populations. Relief workers in conflict zones reported successful emergency communications using jewelry-based transmitters. Domestic violence survivors credited protective accessories with providing crucial evidence for prosecutions, and journalists working in restricted areas used concealed devices to document human rights violations while maintaining their safety. Maya's involvement with humanitarian applications brought her into contact with organizations that operated in the shadowy areas between government agencies and private charities, groups that provided protection for people whose work made them targets for various hostile forces. The collaboration required careful evaluation of each potential client to ensure that protective technology wouldn't be misused for offensive purposes, vetting that drew on Maya's hard-earned understanding of how beneficial research could be corrupted by people with destructive intentions. The international attention Maya's defensive applications attracted included interest from law enforcement agencies seeking discreet protection for undercover operatives, intelligence services that needed communication devices for personnel operating in denied areas, and military organizations developing equipment for special operations in urban environments. Maya approached these requests with extreme caution, recognizing the potential for defensive technology to be adapted for offensive purposes while understanding that legitimate protective applications could save the lives of people serving beneficial causes. Maya's criteria for accepting projects included strict limitations on how her devices could be used, contractual obligations that prevented adaptation for offensive purposes, and ongoing monitoring to ensure that protective technology remained focused on defensive applications. The legal framework Park's team developed provided protection against misuse while allowing beneficial applications to proceed, creating safeguards that reflected Maya's determination to never again see her scientific work corrupted for destructive purposes. The success of Maya's defensive applications led to recognition from scientific organizations that had previously been unaware of her work, awards for innovation that acknowledged her contribution to protecting vulnerable populations while advancing the field of materials science. Maya accepted the recognition with mixed feelings, appreciating acknowledgement of her beneficial work while remaining concerned about the attention that could attract people seeking to exploit her capabilities for less ethical purposes. Maya's relationship with the Portland artisan community deepened as her legitimate jewelry work continued alongside her defensive applications, creating pieces for local galleries that incorporated advanced techniques without revealing their potential for functional applications. The contrast between her public artistic work and her hidden protective research created a satisfying balance that allowed Maya to maintain the peaceful identity she valued while using her expertise for beneficial purposes. The evolution of Maya's work from weapons research to protective applications represented a conscious choice to use advanced capabilities in service of human values rather than destructive purposes. Transformation that required constant vigilance to prevent beneficial research from being corrupted by people who would weaponize any technology for their own ends. Maya's experience with Webb's conspiracy had taught her that protecting the integrity of scientific research required active engagement rather than passive assumption that good intentions would prevent misuse. Maya's legacy as Elena Vasquez was being rewritten through her work as Maya Chen, transformation from someone whose research had been weaponized into someone whose capabilities served to protect people from the kinds of threats she'd once helped create. The journey from weapons developer to protective technologist represented redemption that was measured not in dramatic gestures, but in the daily choices to use expertise for creation rather than destruction, protection rather than threat. The continuing evolution of Maya's workshop reflected her commitment to using advanced technology for beneficial purposes while maintaining the artistic identity that provided both cover and genuine satisfaction, creating beautiful objects that served protective functions without revealing their true capabilities to people who might misuse such knowledge. Maya had learned that the most effective way to prevent the corruption of scientific research was to demonstrate its beneficial applications while remaining vigilant against those who would pervert any capability for destructive purposes. Maya's story continued in the quiet satisfaction of daily work that served human values rather than organizational interests, creating protective technology that saved lives while bringing beauty into the world through artistic achievement that reflected technical sophistication without revealing dangerous capabilities. The peaceful existence she built in Portland represented victory over the assumption that expertise in advanced technology inevitably led to careers serving destructive purposes, proof that scientific capabilities could be redirected toward beneficial applications through conscious choice and careful vigilance. The jewelry Maya created for customers who appreciated handmade craftsmanship carried no hidden devices or concealed capabilities beyond their aesthetic appeal, existing solely to bring beauty into the world rather than serve purposes their purchasers would never suspect. But the protective applications she developed for people facing genuine threats represented the constructive use of expertise that had once been corrupted for destructive purposes. Redemption achieved through daily choices to create rather than destroy, protect rather than threaten, serve human values rather than organizational interests that would corrupt any capability for their own destructive ends. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.